Hello, MSOE fans, and welcome to the Raider Report, where we sit down with MSOE coaches to discuss all things Raider athletics, from game reactions to recruiting news and everything in between. The Raider Report has all the behind-the-scenes details and news you want. This week, our guest is Tim Valley, Vice President of Student Services and Enrollment Management. Alrighty, and at this time, I am joined by our special guest, Tim Valley, the Vice President of Student Services and Enrollment Management. Thanks for taking the time today.
Hey, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a walk down memory lane. Why don't you tell everyone how you became an MSOE Raider all those eons and centuries ago?
Oh, that's funny. So yesterday actually was my 27th year anniversary.
Dang, happy anniversary.
Yeah, thanks. So was asked to come in as a consultant to evaluate the admissions process here a little bit at MSOE, and in doing so, started to learn more about the campus. And then was asked a question like, why aren't you working at a collegiate campus? And that question spurred into, me making a decision to come to MSOE.
For sure. So always has been on the admission side. When did the athletics start to play a role in your career here?
That's probably, I don't know now, that's probably been 8 years ago.
Okay.
But certainly I've always been interested in athletics.
For sure. So tell me a little bit about your history with athletics. Obviously, you had a couple kids play collegiate sports. Your son Colin played at Winona State. Your daughter Danielle played basketball here at MSOE. What role did that play in your life early on? What were you playing back in the day? I'm assuming you played through at least high school, right?
Right. If you call it that, right? Well, for me, sports has always been, I'll call it the sticky part of a person's day. So it's something that for me as a person, I always enjoyed. I enjoyed the teamwork, the camaraderie of a team. When I look back in hindsight, you miss the bus rides and the locker rooms and things like that. You kind of forget about almost the game on the field or the court or whatever.
For real.
Instead, you just remember those relationships and those coaches that, really had, probably a more significant influence than you realized was going on at the time, right?
For sure, yeah. I think some of the lessons you look back, being removed from football now, at least 5 years, it's like, oh, I'm kind of taking away what I should have taken away, later on. So it's funny how that kind of works out and kind of trickles down, if you will. We said Vice President of Student Services and Enrollment Management. That's kind of a big title to the layman. Let's quote Office Space. What exactly would you say you do around here? That seems like a pretty all-encompassing title. But when it boils down to it, what are you in charge of?
That's a good question. There's two ways for me to answer that question, and it's kind of a philosophical way to answer it, and then there's probably the day-to-day aspect of it. And so from the day-to-day aspect of it, let's go the philosophical approach first, right? It's really about getting things aligned and helping people develop a vision for their space, for their area. I like to say creating the time and space, a place and space, right? And so letting them then kind of come into their own and nurture them through that process, right? And then ultimately they're growing in capacity, and then the individuals that report to them or through them grow in their capacity, and then hopefully have a little fun along the way, right?
For sure.
Yeah, so that's kind of it philosophically. On a day-to-day standpoint, if you're doing that well, then what ends up hitting my desk and what I end up spending most or a lot of time on is the vision aspect of things, connecting it to the university's overall vision, as well as then dealing with all the problems that are causing, hurdles to get in the way of allowing that vision to be executed. So on any given day, it's could be something as simple as someone struggling with their meal plan to, how are we going to identify the resources to move us forward closer to that vision. So that kind of describes my day.
Sure. So you talk about helping people realize a vision and kind of that coming to fruition. Mm-hmm. You can't have that if you're not a go-getter, if you're not someone who's going to pursue and stay on people. And you also can't have that if you're not organized to a certain extent, whatever that may be. Has that always been the case for you? Have you always been the go-getter, organized, or did it kind of come out of you as you got older and it was, nothing's going to be handed to me, I have to really start taking it?
Oh, that's interesting. I suppose I don't think I ever really reflected on it that way. But I was one of the only ones in my family that so we lived out in the country, and so to be able to participate in high school athletics, many days I rode my bike in so I could be a part of the practices and stuff like that. None of my other brothers and sisters were willing to put that kind of effort in, right? Sure. So it was a challenge, to do that. And so when I look back on it, I'm like, sure, there's probably a go-getter element to it. I've always just really enjoyed a group of people coming together and achieving an outcome, right? Mm-hmm. And I always haven't been great at celebrating that achievement, right? Sure. And that would be something I'd want to work on, but I've always enjoyed watching the synergy that comes from people working together to achieve something. And that would be what is kind of transferred over into my day-to-day, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can obviously see the connection there, like you said, with athletics, people coming together. It's obviously, hardwired into you to a certain extent. Let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts here at MSOE. Academically, very rigorous, very prestigious institution here. At a school with such a high standard of academics, how does athletics have to bend, if you will, and not necessarily conform to what the expectation is? What everyone thinks of, a Division I school or even a standard Division III school. A lot of places don't have, the engineering rigor and the curriculum that a Milwaukee School of Engineering has.
That's a good question. You may or may not love my answer here, right? But I don't think MSOE does bend. I think our students, their mindset is they enjoy the rigors of this curriculum. They enjoy the challenge that's in front of them, to be both a student athlete and excel in strong academic programs. I think, the first athletic director I ever knew at MSOE, Dan Harris, would say that the academics are there. Now we just need to get athletics at that same level, and they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And so I tend to think that doesn't, so it's a little bit of a secret sauce, right? There's a balance here. It doesn't mean that a coach shouldn't show empathy, or sometimes a professor shouldn't show a level of understanding on maybe an athlete that's in need, right? But there are some really good academic institutions that have really good athletic programs, right? And I don't think we have to apologize on either side. I think we just need to lean into it, step into it, and go after it. And create a path so our athletes can go after it, right? And they can be students first and athletes second.
For sure. And I'm going to put you on the spot with this one. Sorry, I didn't prep you for this, but do you ever think, as someone, like you said, you're working with groups of people, you're kind of a communicator. You're moving from group to group, kind of carrying the message. Is it hard at times when you have people who come from the athletic background who aren't necessarily geared into the engineering, and then they try to cross over with people who have this engineering background who don't necessarily have that athletic background? Is it a lot of times, is it butting heads and you're kind of the facilitator to, get the agreement made?
Yeah, I think, I'll take it away from it almost being a polarizing element. And instead I'll say, even in student affairs, right, where we all have come through a system of higher education. We all were trained or even worked in a system of higher education. And I know every institution will at times will claim, well, we're unique and we're different and we're right. But MSOE is different, right? So when I worked at prior institutions, a lot of times a student being in an engineering curriculum disqualified them from being in other things. I mean, we'll hear this in athletics where some athletes that are really good and potentially are getting recruited at the D1 or even D2 level those coaches aren't in love with the fact that they want to be engineering students because of the time commitment it takes to be a good engineering student. So, but I think there's space for both of those, right? And so we just have to find our own path in that, right, and make it uniquely us, right? But like again, I'll go back to student affairs. There's times when I see the programming we're trying to do or have tried to do. I've certainly been a part of that, right? But it doesn't apply to MSOE like it did at a different liberal arts school or even a medium or mid-sized public, right? So instead, it's like we're, but then we can play to our strength. I mean, in reality, we all are in this together, right? We all are looking for that, I'll call it stage moment, whether you're on a platform, you're putting a medal around your neck as you're a champion of the conference, or whether you're walking across the stage at commencement, right? We're looking for those moments, and we're all working towards them. And that's what makes it kind of a really cool scenario.
For sure. And you mentioned kind of that niche that MSOE kind of can exploit, where these Division I, Division II athletes, are kind of being told, no, you can't. You got to pick one or the other. You got to pick sports or engineering. And MSOE is a spot where, hey, you can have both. And just with the academic rigor and then the athletes that are drawing, that's a real cream of the crop scenario. The people that you're going to pull into this school are going to change the culture, not just of the team. They're going to probably change the culture in the classroom as well.
Well, and we hope that they change the world in which we live, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're hoping they're gaining that self-awareness and that that intentionality with their lives and where they want to make this a better place to be.
For sure. We're in a boom period for Raider athletics. We have new teams coming next year. Bowling's coming down the pipeline next year. Women's hockey is going to officially kick off. Swim and dive started this year. Lacrosse, they have their first seasons under their belt. What was the catalyst, if you will, for this, expansion boom for MSOE sports?
Well, it really goes back to one of our benefactors, challenging me on how we could use sports to enhance the student experience while also growing enrollment.
Sure.
And she really, pushed on me about that. And when we finally got out of our own way, we saw that grow real rapidly. And it was it added a women's roster, and that sport was women's golf, right? And it just exploded real quickly. So then that caused me to think, well, wow, if we can do that in that space, which at one point wouldn't even have been necessarily a popular sport for us, what would it look like if we actually looked at the resources we had and utilized those resources, and then, of course, had to build out some resources too.
Sure.
But what would that look like? And so really leveraging athletics to meet some institutional priorities while building athletics. And so that's really where all that came from. And then, like an engineering school, right? You put it to a spreadsheet and see if it makes sense. and it certainly made sense. And then fortunately we received some great support to do that, and really haven't looked back since we did that.
For sure. Talk to me about some of the challenges that Division III athletic programs face. There's a lot of buzz going around right now. There have been some closures of some Division III institutions nearby, and higher education as a whole is kind of at a little crossroads, if you will. So what have been the hurdles for Raider athletics that maybe, that someone like me or the average fan doesn't necessarily see?
Yeah, I think you can get real institutional here. I mean, just expanding on adding some of those sports. it did have an impact internally, right? It meant that we had to get tighter on our schedules. We had to figure out locker room situations. We had to figure out just a pay scale. There are so many things that, honestly, so that in itself was a challenge, right? And we hadn't added a sport for quite a long time. And so just some of that was a big deal. I'm not trying to minimize sports medicine or sports information or any of those things as well. So those just internally are a challenge. Nationally, youth sports participations has remained high, right? Certainly COVID, it took a little bit of a dip, but if you think about how the world continued to move, it was through sports, right? We figured out a way as a country to continue in that space. That's just a thread that, to me, provides that path for an athlete or an individual to identify and see a place for themselves at an organization. And so that to me is what students expect today, right? Even your best students can't spend their entire day studying, right? Or they're not rounded, right? Or they're not necessarily the person you're gonna want in your organization, right? So athletics provides that path into it. So I think institutions in today's climate have to be very intentional on the supports and the opportunities they're going to provide students, because you don't want to overspend. You can't, there's just challenges with all that, right? So I think being competitive in the classroom, it begins with that, but then being competitive and being, providing students opportunities outside the classroom, they expect it all, and you gotta provide that for them.
For sure.
I kind of went around in circles there a little bit, but you can see how it all kind of blends together.
I've been holding your feet to the fire there. I don't blame you. So we'll break it up. We'll do Raider Rapid Fire. We'll do everyone's favorite segment here. Yeah. All right. Been asking everyone this. We'll see if you have a unique answer. If you were a NASCAR driver, what would that car look like? The number, the color, the sponsor. What's Tim Valley ripping around Talladega?
Yeah, it isn't even difficult. Car's red and black. I don't have a choice, right?
For sure.
It's kind of how I bleed. The number's 33. That's my number, right?
Okay.
My goal in life is to get people to say that number as much as I possibly can. So just having it on my car so they would have to call that number would be perfect. Sponsorship. That's a good one. I don't.
When I walked in here, I would lean Crunchy Cheetos. The black and red Crunchy Cheetos 33.
Yeah, there you go. I don't dislike that. I'm a Cheetos guy. It would probably. I can go with that. I would see if I could dig up an MSOE sponsorship somehow. Maybe,
sure. Everyone's rocking the red car, though. I don't know if that's just because we're here or what it is, but
yeah.
All right, Tim, if they were going to make a movie, whether it would be a comedy, a drama, an action thriller, what's the one scene of your life that has to make it in that movie?
I was fortunate enough to have a person in my life who took interest in me, and he threw a quote at me that really, quite honestly, changed the way I look at a lot of things. And that quote was, Tim, if you were going to trade a day of your life for what you do today, is it worth it? Right. And that individual is a guy by the name of Bob Winter, and he was an MSOE alum, and we worked very close together in a big project. And at the time when he asked me that question, I just kind of went, well, of course I would, but what the heck, it's not a big deal, right? And then by the end of the day, I went back to him and I said, you asked me this question this morning, and I'm like, I'm not sure I would really trade a day of my life for what I did today, right? And little did I know that he was just really testing me, and because I came back to him with that, he decided to invest his time and energy in me, and he had a big impact on my life. And little did I know at the time that he a few months later was going to be diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus, and he wouldn't be on this earth a year later.
Jeez.
Right? So that would have to make the movie.
Sure, of course.
But because I think that's a message that we all should reflect on a bit. It's like, if you were going to trade a day of your life, for what you're going to do today, essentially, would you do it? Is it worth it? And I think if we ask ourselves that question, that helps formulate what our day might look like.
Yeah, no, and you hear the phrase "make every day count." When you phrase it like that, when you trade, that's very profound. Very reflective. All right, here's the haymaker. I was inspired by Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. When Floyd walked to the octagon that fight, he had young Justin Bieber, he had Jimmy Kimmel, and the Burger King walk him to the ring. If you were in the main event fight, say you're throwing down with Mike Tyson, who's got to walk you to the ring? Who's there standing shoulder to shoulder with you?
Oh, wow. Well, my wife would have to walk me to the ring, right? She's a support mechanism for sure. And I would probably bring my kids into the ring with me, right?
Yeah.
They would be the ones that I'd want them there, because they may not always be the biggest or maybe the most athletic or whatever, but their passion for Dad, it seems pretty good. So
sure.
let's play into that a little bit.
Hell yeah, rock on. All right, we'll get back on track here. So I mentioned earlier, your son Colin played football at Winona State. Your daughter Danielle played basketball here at MSOE. Talk about watching your kids play at the college level. Did that change your perspective at all? Obviously, you said you've been doing athletics for about 8 years now. Colin would have been playing before that. Did you worry about Danielle more than Colin? Did you worry about Colin more than Danielle? How does that perspective kind of change once you have like a foot in one door and a foot in the other?
Yeah, I didn't really worry about either one of them. That's the funny thing about raising children, right? Is that at some point you realize your place is no longer one of really worry or even control, right? You kind of let them to their own demise or to their own successes, right? So worry wasn't really the thing. I think that, and I was one of these parents, while I really didn't ever want to miss a game or anything like that, I also let them take their own path, right? So like if they, if they wanted to talk about the game afterwards, I'd talk about the game afterwards. If they didn't want to talk about the game afterwards, we didn't talk about the game afterwards, or whatever the case might be. But I think the solidifying moment for me was really when Colin played football at Winona State and was involved in the recruiting process, but then didn't see the head coach or say hi to the head coach until senior day. When Colin was going out on the field, and you meet the head coach and they thank you. And, it kind of shows the way I approached it. It's like, this is your gig. This is what is important to you. So go make the most of it. Right. Mm-hmm. And then when Colin was done playing and stayed on for a few years as a grad assistant or whatever, and I happened to run into the head coach and went in and shook his hand again and said, who I was. Oh, I know who you are. And I said, I just want to thank you, because I'm not sure where Colin would have been at without football. And he goes, where do you think any of us would have been without football? And to me, that just solidified it for me. It's like that the sports, the coaches, the whole experience makes it a sticky place and an incredible place for a student to grow in capacity. And Colin went from a football scholarship to his final year as an undergrad at Winona on a full academic scholarship, right? Mm-hmm. I got to tell you, that was just amazing transition for me, right?
Sure.
Danielle, same kind of thing, right? And that really tells the story. It's like, make it your path, make it your journey, but make the most of it, right? And if in the right experiences, they do.
For sure. And if I can ask you this, then having, kids who have, been through college athletics, who have gone through the whole 4-year ride, is it ever hard for you do you ever get caught up emotionally in stuff where you really want to fight for these kids so that they can get what you think is right? and ultimately you can't get through the red tape sometimes.
Yeah, that's probably a bit painful, right? When you say that, because it can be misunderstood,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
And we all have our own limitations, so maybe I don't communicate it as well as I could.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of it is, there was a time in all of my children's life where others, which typically were coaches, had a greater influence on them than I did as their father, right? Mm-hmm. And so with that comes a tremendous amount of responsibility for a coach to understand that, right? As administrators, there's a tremendous amount of responsibility to make sure our athletes are working in an environment that supports them and helps them grow, right? And so if I feel like we're lacking in that space, that's where I can get a little bit worked up.
Sure. So let me ask you then, if we step back and go big picture here for Raider athletics, we've been adding all these new sports, but if we were to jump in a time machine and go 10 years ahead, what would you want to see from Raider athletics? Is it national championships? Is it new facilities? What is the goal?
Yeah, it's all that, right? It's all that, but at the core of it, the thing that is fundamental to it all is that we are providing athletes an opportunity and an environment where they're exceeding more than they ever thought they were capable of exceeding. That's both on the competition field, court, whatever, pool, whatever it might be, track, as well as in the classroom. When you can provide an environment where someone is lifted up to a point where they're exceeding their own, what they think they're capable of, their own, they set a limit for themselves and they went beyond that. Then, man, that's the secret sauce, right? So, people get caught up in facilities and people get caught up in everything being beautiful. But at the end of the day, I can tell you as a parent, right, if I can promise, right, or if a person can say to me, we're going to provide an environment where your child is going to do far better than they even think they're capable of providing, I wouldn't care if the pool water was 45 degrees Fahrenheit, right? We're gonna give that a whirl, right? Sure. Because at the end of the day, I do think a lot of our own limitations sit between our ears, and if we can manage that, we can do a lot, right? For sure. So, do I want to win championships? Yeah, you see me at these events. I sit up in the top, the bleachers, or I'm in a corner and I'm mumbling and I'm grumbling, right? I'm as competitive as the next person, but it really is in the spirit of like, is this just an outcome of the preparation and the growth that we've experienced, and then therefore we can achieve through that, right? For sure. So, do I talk about a new facilities, or would I love to see some additions? Absolutely. The university will give us guidance in that as we move forward. We'll be able to have a voice in that as we move forward. But at the end of the day, it's really about growth. It's really about those athletes, again, achieving more than they thought they were capable of achieving.
For sure. And I usually keep things pretty athletic on the podcast, but I want to circle back. We talked about the student who, the high-level athlete who isn't necessarily able to, do engineering in their college career. And then we obviously know all the aspects of athletic recruiting that go into it. What sets MSOE apart academically from other schools? What is the engineering, key? I know, like at Winona State, for example, composite materials engineering was a big draw. Mm-hmm. That was a big, unique program. The nursing program, another one. Same with education. What are the specific draws to MSOE other than being right on the water and beautiful, scenic Milwaukee, Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think what makes it unique is we know who they are. We know what makes them tick. We know that mindset. We know, that engineering student is one of ours, right? There's there's a unique framework there that they bring to the table that we can lean into and that we really truly understand them, right?
Sure.
And then, I'm not trying to take away from nursing or even business in those spaces, because we're creating those communities as sub-communities on campus as well, right? So they can find their place and feel that sense of belonging that they need to as well. But I think that, like, if a curriculum is somewhat of a curriculum, but the way we go about instructing that curriculum or the pedagogy of that curriculum is phenomenal as well. So when there's so many learning theories out there, but one of the learning theories that has been proven now throughout the years is just how, when you're using your hands and you're working on a project, the level of learning just goes up so much. Now you can see brain activity, and it's crossed the entire brain when those things are happening. And that's our curriculum, right? So it's not surprising to me that the things I hear about our graduates are like, man, they get it done. They're confident. They're willing to take on bigger projects. They're beyond just technology. They're beyond. I hear it over and over, right?
For sure.
And that's a game changer for us.
Yeah, and like you said, having hands-on experience, especially when you're early on, trying to get your foot in the door at a lot of places, that's what they want. And if you have the experience, tangible, regardless of what application it was in, it's going to set you up for that much more success, rather than you're going to walk in the door, okay, and now we have to hold your hand and kind of guide you along.
Well, I mean, our youngest son, just finished his junior year, and he's got an internship this summer, and day 2, he texts me to say, hey, I just did this today. And it was just a phenomenal thing that the organization is probably like, wow, this is great, right?
Yeah.
And that's just an awesome thing.
For sure. I'm going to start to pump the brakes a little bit here. I know you're a busy guy, and we got to get you out of here. What are the expectations for the Green Bay Packers this season? Now that you know the Bears are back, now that you know there's a looming threat.
As Packer fans are always optimistic that the Bears can screw it up. So I'm not overly.
You wouldn't have any reason to think differently.
Not overly worried about that. No, that's good. I like their draft. They certainly hyped that up well. I do feel like they hit the right positions. My expectations are that I'm going to enjoy Sunday afternoons, and I'll be ready to come to work on Monday. How about if I leave it at that?
For sure. Alrighty, I've got to ask you, like you said, you've been here for 27 years now. You've been around Milwaukee. You've seen the sights. What's one thing you'd recommend, whether it's a food, a movie, just a place to go hang out? What's one spot people have to go see when they come to Milwaukee?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think there's nothing better than a good beer garden with a little music playing. So whether it's, Cathedral Square, on a Thursday night for, the music going on over there, or the beer garden at Esterbrook or whatever. I think there isn't, a summer in Milwaukee, that you can't beat it, right? So that would be my 2 cents on that, or a walk down on the lakefront or whatever. But just enjoy the peacefulness of the summer in Milwaukee.
For sure. And then my last question: if Tim Valley was put in charge of booking Summerfest,
oh
this year,
boy, yeah,
who is the Sunday headliner? Who's closing out the show? How are you sending everyone home happy?
Yeah.
Or maybe you're sending them home mad and you're just worried about yourself.
Well, I'm a big Zach Brown guy, so it would probably lean that way.
A little bit of chicken fried.
Yeah, a little chicken fry would work. I'll probably leave it at that. I don't,
You're past your hair metal days. We're not.
Well, it's funny because the kids have always kept me a little young, right? So they'll throw something on and I'll like the vibe of it all. Could I come up with the name of it? Probably not, right? But yeah, so if you had to nail me down on one band, it'd probably be Zach Brown.
Well, hey, rock on. I want to thank you for taking the time to sit with me today, Tim. And thank you for chatting with us.
All right, thanks, Greg.
Thank you to Tim for taking the time to join us this week. And thank you, as always, for listening. You can follow Raider Athletics on YouTube at MSOE Raider Athletics. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MSOE_Raiders. Don't forget to find us on Spotify too. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, repost, share, and get the word out to all your Raider friends and family. We want you to be heard. Mention us on social media and tell us what you want to hear about. Go Raiders!